I mean, this is where I had hoped that the younger generation would be more like that. But, when I see the kind of communalism, it disturbs me because I had thought people coming behind us, would be far more broad-minded than I find.
Welcome to the Global Indian Podcast, the world's greatest journey and the official platform for people of Indian origin. Because let's face it, we are everywhere. My name is Rajan and Nazran, and on our weekly show, we plunge into the human experience of being a person of Indian origin, take a closer look at the countries we now call home, and tackle the issues you need to know more about. This is the world's greatest journey that will ultimately change the way you see the notion of Indianness to be, and importantly, our connection to each other. Every week, the team and I are joined by our guests, where we have open conversations about the 50 shades of brown that is our experience, and take a closer look at the issues close to their hearts. In this episode, we go back to the United Kingdom to meet with the one and only, the fantastic Baroness Usha Prashar. She has been a dear friend and a magnificent custodian of change in the United Kingdom. A career that has spanned over the course of 5 decades of public service. She was involved in issues such as the Iraq inquiry. She was the president, the chair of the Royal Commonwealth Society at one point, heavily involved in organisations such as FICCI, as well as being a non-executive director for leading companies in the United Kingdom from Channel 4 through to ITV. The fact is, there isn't much that Usha hasn't been involved in that has meant a cultural shift in the UK. But this podcast is of particular importance to myself because it's the first time ever that we get to see the personality behind a custodian of real change in the UK, and actually taken some of the biggest conversations that even the UK media has yet to do. This podcast has been supported by our dear friends at ShareMe.com, the app for all your beauty, wellness and fitness needs. I hope you enjoy this session.
And just move. Get up 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 and just.
I think Usha, you've lived this extraordinary life. You had a huge impact on the UK as a whole, across the Commonwealth. And your early days started from Kenya, from all places. And now, 72 years on, what's it like to be you?
What is it like to be me?
Yeah.
What is it like to be me is me. I mean, I think of myself as a human being who wanted to make a difference, wanted to make life better, and also deal with injustices. And of course, I was born in Kenya, but came here at the age of 15 to study. And of course, while in Kenya, I had seen the struggle for independence. So it left a very sort of impression on me. And I was very pleased when when Kenya got independence. And I came here to study with the view to going back. But while I was here, things changed in terms of both the Immigration Act and the Africanization policy, so I stayed on. But for me, it's not of where you're born, what your origin is. To me, I think in terms of humanity, is what making a difference to humanity and to making place a kind of a better place. So when you say, who am I mean, I just think of me being kind of a citizen of the world, an individual who works with people, loves people, likes people, loves life.
But there's much more, because you're a great symbol for yourself, but for a lot of other people across the UK. You've also been a symbol of change in the United Kingdom. And you're involved in some of the most pressing issues that took place here. Yeah, I suppose frustratingly on my side at least, people haven't really recognized you into the limelight that it should be. You took on some of the biggest battles in the UK, for example, the Iraq inquiry. You also helped, you're one of the lead people when it came to assisting the Ugandan Asians to come into the UK. Why take on those challenges?
Well, I suppose I to me, it was not taking on the challenge because, I mean, let's start with the Ugandan nation situation. I had at that time started my very first job at the Race Relations Board, which was set up following the 1968 legislation to deal with racial discrimination. So when the Ugandan Asian situation arose, the chief conciliation officer of the Race Relations Board came to talk to me, and I was at that time only about 23, 24, and said, you understand East Africa, and what can you advise us to do? So I sort of talked to him, and it was a question of working with the Uganda Resettlement Board, giving advice, talking things through. So it was basically you were drawn into it, and therefore it to me seemed logical that that you had the experience to actually help people in that situation. But I can tell you something amusing in a way, because you can see that how early in those days, the sort of way government looked at things, you see, because they were very concerned that Ugandans who came here shouldn't go to the very areas where there were already very many immigrants. They didn't want concentrations. So they were basically saying, do not go to Leicester, because in a way there are already many immigrants there. And they initially said, we're going to call them black and white areas. And we said, for God's sake, don't call them black and white areas. If you want to do that, it's red and green. But let me tell you, in practice, it will not work because people will be drawn to areas, where there is comfort and so on. So I just think, that was kind of an indirect role I played. I didn't go and work directly for the Uganda Resettlement Board because I was kind of in the early stages, working with the Race Relations Board in kind of setting it up. Coming to the Iraq inquiry, I mean, as you know, that it was a very contentious issue. And I have this sort of great belief that trust in government and open democracy is very important. And the Iraq inquiry, I think, was a very important way, almost cathartic for the community, to be able to see what happened, to analyze the situation. And I just felt it was an important thing to do because it's a strength of a very strong democracy which lays itself open to actually examine more transparently what happened. It was longer than we expected, but I mean, I was personally, and of course, credit goes to the whole of the Iraq team, that it was so well received, and the kind of coverage we had after when it was published was in some ways very satisfying because once and for all, it kind of attempted to give a very accurate exposition of what happened. And we were very keen that some lessons were learned. Unfortunately, we were overshadowed by the Brexit referendum. But nevertheless, I think the lessons are there, and it's a very, very good piece of work, which I'm very proud of.
Because I suppose you are a custodian of truth. You've always fought along those lines to make sure that what is best for the people as well as the communities out there. What would be your biggest frustration then with something like the Iraq inquiry, apart from the advent of Brexit debate that took on from there? Do you think, because that was a calling card to say those in power should also face justice. What was your biggest frustration at the end of that, if there were any?
Well, I think the frustration was, I mean, it wasn't about justice, actually exploring what happened, what lessons could be learned. And I think my frustration has been that Parliament hasn't played the role it should have played, because from my point of view, the recommendations we made and the lessons that we highlighted should have been picked up by the select committees in the Houses, in House of Commons. And they should have actually held the government departments to account to see what are they doing in response to the recommendations. And the other sad thing is that we never got a formal response from government. So to me, having spent that time, energy, and of course, public money of having done what I call is an excellent piece of work, and to find that it wasn't really picked up by government or by Parliament, House of Commons, I think has been my frustration. Because there are some really good lessons. It's not just about whether, when you take a country to war, for me, the great interest, my personal interest, was machinery of government, how decisions are made. It's about the governance of the country. So I was very interested in that area of work, and that's been my frustration.
Well, that leads me on. Do you see, obviously, in your body of work, it's been 72 years on this planet as a global Indian, making systemic change across there. Have you seen a changing shift in governments, in culture, in the way that people see each other to be? Because you've always been a cultural custodian, you've always tried to make people come together. You obviously, as part of FICCI, as a chairperson there, you've done incredible work there. But we're starting to live now in a more of a divisive environment than ever before.
Well, I think it's a kind of a mixed picture. I mean, if I go back to when I first came here, there was obviously the question of the newness of immigrants, and there were sort of misunderstandings, and there was kind of, it was us and them. And therefore, working in terms of not just getting the policies right, but it was getting people to come together and actually understand. I think at one level, there is now more interaction, but you're right. What I'm seeing is more greater balkanization. There is division, and people are kind of in their little segments, and there is much more kind of communalism as well, which I think for me is disappointing, because I would have thought that, as I say, starting my point of view, looking at things from the point of view of humanity, people will come together as people and not see themselves as separate. I'm Black, I'm Asian, I'm Afro-Caribbean, I'm a Hindu, I'm a Jain. And I think all this sort of difference being exaggerated is what does, trouble me. And we're now getting this sort of division, not just on grounds of communities, but also the debate about generations. You know what I mean? The kind of the generation divide, setting up the millennials against the older people. And I think the whole thing is being driven by division, rather than saying, how do we actually come together, look at commonalities, how we can together make society more cohesive and better. Now, that is not to say you don't recognize difference, because, to me, a difference is where you actually enrich the dialogue, which is not just about, I always think that you have better understanding if you have a proper dialogue, understanding, listen and hear people, what they're saying. And therefore you begin to see, what are the common denominators, yet respecting each other's cultures and so on and so forth. For me, I'm very proud to be Kenyan Asian, I'm very proud to be Indian heritage, I'm very proud to be British. There are different multiple identities, but that doesn't in any way inhibit me from being part of the whole.
Why has that happened, then, in your opinion? Where has this come from?
Why has that happened? That's a pretty complex, it's a difficult question.
That's fine. You've only got 5 minutes to answer it all. You got plenty of time.
That's actually, quite complex. Why has it happened? I think there are a number of reasons. One is, I think, when people migrate and you don't get a complete sense of inclusion and belonging, you kind of revert inwards, you actually fall back. And that has been one reason why. And on the other side, I think, is that the community divisions, to some extent, have been exploited by politicians, because, when I was working at Runnymede, when they were used to be thinking in terms of, giving money to sort of community groups, that was a way of saying, well, we'll give money to an Irish center or a Afro-Caribbean center or a Muslim center, we'll give them the money. And that was to some extent, to kind of, get votes back and get these people, to kind of vote for you. It wasn't that overt, but that was the reason. So there wasn't the effort to say, look, while we respect difference, there's a fundamental framework of the values around which we actually, come together. So I just think that's one reason. And the other impact, I suppose, is that, it's a much bigger issue, which is about globalization. Globalization has meant that those who've been able to have benefited, others have been quite threatened by globalization. and therefore they kind of reverted back inwards. You see, so there's a whole range of complex areas, issues, why people have tended to kind of, get into their separate, groups as such. And also, I suppose, if you are in a new place, you want recognition, and people have used their community base to get recognition as well. So this kind of, all these things feed into each other. And also, I think, post 9/11, religion came to the fore as well. We started developing the word faith communities. And I think all of that meant that people have tended to look at it from the lens of religion as well. So a number of things have happened over the years to kind of bring that kind of division. And I do regret that.
Yeah. In what way?
Well, in a sense, it comes back to my earlier point, because I just think that by actually exaggerating the differences and each community wanting their own little bit means that you're not looking at common humanity and kind of the common needs of a society. Because to me, to live in a society, there's got to be give and take.
Yeah.
You've got to recognize where you give, and what you take. It's a process of actually building a society where different values come together, and there has to be compromises. And I feel that some communities are not willing to compromise, and that is not to say that you lose your identity. But it's what I think is, as I said to you, that I'm very proud to be who I am, but at the same time, I am very much part of the society here. And that is not to say that you do not fight racial discrimination, injustice, all of that. Of course, that's been part of my life, to fight injustice. But you fight injustice on everybody's behalf.
Absolutely. Is the Britain that we live in now the one that you'd hope to be in 2020? Because it's been an extraordinary career that you've had. You have tackled on some of the biggest issues, but are we at the place that you wish we were?
I think in some ways, yes, but in majority of the way, no. Because I think if I visualized, I expected for us to have become much more of a cohesive society, where race and gender didn't really matter. You know what I mean? I wanted to say a day when nobody would say, well, I'm the first Asian to be here, I'm the first Sikh to be here. To me, it should be a matter of course. You know what I mean? Therefore, we're looking at bigger issues in that sense. I'm also sort of disappointed in the way we've seen the rise in kind of populism, and nationalism, which have all contributed, in some form or another to the kind of society we have at the moment. Because the whole question of populism, and this, is something which I didn't quite expect. Because I thought that we would be far more progressive, democracy will be, much more strengthened, there'd be less inequality, all those things, that you were actually fighting for. And to see that really hasn't happened, and to some extent, the kind of the social liberal agenda has been attacked by populism, is actually worrying. So I think, from my point of view, those things do bother me, and also if you look at the areas I worked in, because if you look at race relations, for me, I thought we would not have the kind of problems we've seen, because it distresses me when I look at reports from organizations like Runnymede Trust that I ran for so many years. But, one sees the data, which really pains me to say one has seen very little progress. And then when you see issues like stop and search, and you see issues like police relations, all of those things around when I was working Runnymede Trust in the 70s,
Yeah.
And to me, for them to have surged their head again troubles me. The other thing which I, of course, worked in, as you know, because, for me, having run the National Council for Voluntary Organizations, I was involved in voluntary activity, because, as someone said, voluntary activity is a lifeblood of a vibrant democracy.
Yeah.
And I also feel that to some extent, the voices of dissent and voluntary organizations to some extent are stifled. then I mean, I look at, what's happening to our impartial civil service, and I look at, what all the areas that I worked, there are issues which worry me in the way the country's going.
Hmm. What would be your biggest fear then for the future generations here? Because we
Well,
can see this trajectory going through, and when one considers where we were
yeah.
only up until 10 years ago to where we've achieved now.
Well, I mean, I'm one of these people. I mean, I don't worry in the sense I remain hopeful because I think that for the younger generation, um, uh, who are in their kind of 20s and 30s now, I think they are beginning to see the kind of world they want, and their world reality is so much different because of social media. And of course, there's a downside and upside of social media. They're very much connected. And when I see the response of young people, through the Commonwealth and elsewhere, they're concerned about climate change, they're concerned about the environment, they're concerned, about the kind of, the purpose of life. The way the younger people are being to react, I think gives me hope, because I think they will react to some of the things that went so desperately wrong in the last decade. So I put a lot of uh, faith in the younger generation. And it's for that reason I personally like to work with younger people, because I just think, one, I see a different level of enthusiasm, and I feel one can impart certain kind of experience to them, but also learn from them, because their reality is very different to my realities. Because, I'm not a native kind of digital person. To me, technology for me is something I had to learn. For people like you and the younger generation, you've actually grown up with it. So I just think, that's going to be, and I feel this, pandemic for the last 4 months have actually highlighted some of the things, which we've been talking about. And people really have come to rethink, where were we going? We were so obsessed with kind of materialism. We were so obsessed with all sorts of things, which may give you material comforts, but doesn't actually give you meaning to your life. And I think people are beginning to realize that. So I'm hoping we can bottle and capture some of that and actually work with young people for the future.
Absolutely. It's look, here's a question. Obviously you're born in Kenya. Kenya, I'm assuming, does Kenya mean anything to you as a person?
Very much so, because I always sometimes jokingly say I'm a daughter of Africa. In a way, I was born in Kenya. It's a country I'm very fond of. I sort of keep in touch with what's going on. And as I said, you see, this is what I mean about when I say I'm citizen of the world. To me,
Yeah.
humanity is not about being communal, that I'm this, that, the other, because to me, I'm a mixture of all those experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not about being tribal in
No,
one's thoughts.
it is not being, I mean, this is where I'd hoped that the younger generation would be more like that. But, when I see the kind of communalism, it disturbs me, because I thought people coming behind us, would be far more broad-minded than I find them.
Absolutely. It is a dangerous warpath, because you see in different pockets around the world, you're there. And now all of a sudden nationalism or tribalism has become the new norm. And you think, what is the second bounce of the ball? Where are we heading to? And I think one thing that we've almost oversubscribed to in the United Kingdom has been that notion of, I am the first Asian that has achieved this, or I'm the first Sikh or the first Hindu.
I know.
And
I mean, that is something
dangerous.
which I find. I mean, see what when you're saying to me, that what I've done, because to me, what is important is not me that I'm doing it. It's important to me is the issue that you're dealing with.
But would you say, hand on heart, that other members of the House of Lords or even other politicians do feel or have the same purpose and drive that you have?
Well, I mean, I can't.
And I know you can be diplomatic and you can say, of course, like one cannot speak on behalf of other highly esteemed individuals, but on the
also,
humanistic sense.
No, I mean, I really wouldn't want to get into that, so because each person have their own journey, and they may have different motivations. So I really cannot say that. I can only speak about myself, what motivates me.
So in other words, there has to be a new impetus then from within the communities that people are more open to say who are the best. Well,
yes, I mean, this is what I said. To me, I would want younger people to start thinking differently. And I think people like yourselves, who are doing this sort of work, are the leaders of the future. And you should really be thinking about this. And what are the areas that you're going to actually mobilize young people around?
If I wasn't wearing pink, you'll see me blushing right now. But thank God for the beard, hey. Usha, look, what I was coming to, obviously, I know that you're humanistic in your approach, but I think part and parcel of the fragility of being in the human form is that we have this distinction of the places of one's birth. Kenya obviously means something to you. You're a person that lands there. Do you feel that you mean anything to Kenya?
Well, the point is, I don't go to what that question is, what I intended to be. Do I mean anything to Kenya? Well, I mean, when I've had some interactions, you know what I mean? Kenya's, proud of me, in that sense. Um, but but you see, from my point of view, I've never thought about it. Do I mean anything to, I mean, do I mean anything to the UK? Do I mean anything to India?
Hmm.
Do I mean anything anywhere, if you see what I mean?
Hmm.
So, I mean, that's not, I mean, I'm not sure.
I know that sounds more like a transactional relationship because it's saying, well,
Exactly,
one's doing what they're doing for that reason, but I
exactly.
suppose.
So to me, I mean, I never think of it like that. To me, it's what I am motivated to do, which I think would help wherever I am.
Hmm. Yeah, I can see that. I suppose that's the thing. Your trajectory has been so different from a lot of other members out there in the United Kingdom because you have fought for things that are ultimately larger than the community. It's nationwide.
Yeah,
It's about
exactly.
having fairness
Exactly.
and justice. When we come back into some of the biggest elements globally, I saw something of you recently where you spoke about culture. And indeed, culture is that element of relationships. And we are seeing this more insular societies being built up. Apart from the movement of youth, in your opinion, what has to happen then for people to start shifting their way? Is it down to the bottom line of mobilizing the youth together to say, look, we do want change? Or there has to be a different way in which governments are run?
I think it's a bit of both, but I'm of the view now that the governments will only run differently if they get a push from the bottom. Because I think the way governments are structured here or elsewhere, people have a vested interest in it. I mean, look at the debate here in terms, even trying to, change the voting patterns or reform, right? But I think what we need is younger people to start organizing and pushing from bottom up, because I think what's needed is a kind of movement for change, which is kind of bottom up, because they would want to see things done differently. And that's where I feel a lot of work needs to happen. Because if you look at, uh, the Arab Spring, what happened in Tunisia, a lot of young people, revolted, right? But then what happened ultimately? Nothing at the top changed, so that's where the disillusionment sets in.
Yeah.
And therefore, what we need is younger people moving, but also somebody within in between, making sure that you're able to shake the systems that work. And I think we've got to illustrate how different systems, need to respond. But this is why I think young people coming together to actually articulate what's needed, how they see the world, has to be the starting point. Because I am not very optimistic that the system, the way the countries are run, has the capacity or the will to change, because they're in their comfort zones.
Isha, I think it's just remarkable. I could listen to you for the entire day. It's because you've got this incredibly rich background in terms of cultural knowledge, but also in terms of practical change. And you've seen that. Has there ever been a moment in your life during that course that you thought, do you know what? No, I'm done. It's too much stress. It's too much issues. I want to go off and do something else. I know that obviously this is your purpose. It is who you are, but there must have been times in your career that you thought, what on earth am I doing? Why am I in this situation?
But at one level, I have been lucky, because all the jobs that I have done, I've done because I wanted to do them, and they were all very satisfying. Because if you look back, I wanted to make a difference, because I should tell you a little story in my earlier life. Because when I came from Kenya, I went to a place called Wakefield in Yorkshire.
Hmm.
And Um, my sister-in-law was English. She was a health visitor, and this is 64. There was no race legislation, and she was dealing with communities who'd come from Mirpur, no English language. So I went around interpreting because I could speak, Punjabi and so on. Now I saw firsthand at the age of 15, 16, the stresses and the issues faced by people who migrate, particularly women who were at home. And then when I went to Leeds University, I became involved on the campaign against racial discrimination, because it was kind of starting out at that stage, also teaching English to immigrant women in those days. So that kind of fired me to kind of get involved in race relations, because I said to you, I wanted to go back to Kenya and did international relations and all of that. But that's what got me into working in race relations, because I thought, this needed to be done. So from working from there, then the Runnymede Trust came along. You know what I mean? All the work I did on race, and I wanted to. One of the things which I wanted to tell you is that one of the reasons when I left Runnymede Trust after almost 7 years, I realized that to make a change, one had to mainstream oneself. I didn't want to be in a kind of a cul-de-sac just doing race-related work. So I went for 2 years to Policy Studies Institute, where I sort of looked at, how organizations change. I became very interested in organizational change. And that's when I thought, well, I need to get into a mainstream job. And it was from there I applied to be the director of National Council for Voluntary Organizations. I was, appointed, and to me, it was kind of working in the voluntary sector per se. Now, voluntary sector at that stage, not really being good at integrating new minorities, but that's why the community relations councils were set up, you know what I mean? And there were self-help groups, you see. So it's a question of really thinking how you do that. And from then on, all my jobs have been in the mainstream. And so therefore, it was very much purposefully done, because I knew where I needed to make a difference, or to illustrate, what a minority person can do in the mainstream. So, if you look at from then, I went to the parole board, the Civil Service Commission, judicial appointments, Iraq inquiry, the whole spade of things, which you're aware of. I think I would be honest with you, it's of late, I have felt a little despondent, not saying I'm, fed up, I'm stressed out, despondent simply because all the things one worked for, in some ways one sees regression. Yes. And I thought to myself, have I spent all these years working in these areas, But a very wise friend said to me, she said, look, just think, if we hadn't done this, things would be far worse.
Yeah.
So I think, there is still kind of a fire in my belly to do things, and I will do things, in a way. But my great intention is to continue to kind of inspire younger people, because I do think people 20s, 30s, 40s, And you say, I love having these kind of dialogues with people, not to say what I've done, but actually to be able to show people how systems work, where they need to do things differently. I think if I have a desire, it's really to work in that space now, where I feel that, I can maybe give something to younger people, but at the same time learn something from them, because as I said to you earlier, my realities are very different to your realities. And the stresses that you have are very different to the stresses I went through. So it's through that understanding and thinking, how do we pave the way to go forward?
See, it's interesting, because when I look at yourself, you came at a time in the UK where things were incredibly different. Now, obviously, I travel and I go back and forth to different regions of the world, and almost you come across those cultural shifts or those tides that are starting to come in. But your reality, Usha, is incredible, because you were fighting for change at a time that most people would even realize. And now we're going for the marches. Now we're saying change is here. The very seeds of that were implemented in the 1970s, in the 60s, when you were there actually saying, we need to look at this. Yeah. That must be a level of, okay, there's no point asking the question, because I can almost preempt the answer of it. But of course not, Rajan. No. I'm very pleased that the change is finally here. But you're right, on that professional point of view, that feeling of despondency, the fact that you want to shake it off must be there, because you're thinking, are we back here again? And so therefore you're saying to the younger generation, You should be fighting for change. You should be fighting to make a difference. But if it has not happened yet in your lifetime, in the circles of power that you've been around, what chance is it that it would change for the next generation?
Well, see, you know, the point really is it will change. You know, different issues, you know, keep coming up because, you know, when I started, there was blatant discrimination. You know, there was, you know, foul speeches. You know, it was really overt, and all that's kind of changed to some extent. And I think it's now manifesting itself in kind of different ways. So I suppose, you know, the situations change and people's expectations change. You know, what kind of society they want changes as well. So I I don't get worried about the fact, you know, the point is this is a kind of an ongoing debate. You know, other issues come up anyway.
Yeah.
And therefore, you've got to remain hopeful. You've got to remain constantly vigilant. That there's no kind of regression and so on. And each stage, you actually make a difference. I mean, what sometimes amuses me, people say that the term institutional racism was actually coined by Macpherson. And I can tell you it wasn't the case. It was done because when Scarman, after the 1982 uprisings, published his report, he said there is no institutional racism in the UK because he thought this was a bit like South Africa, this apartheid. And I actually wrote a piece in the Observer
Yes.
challenging him that there is institutional racism, and this is now in 1982. And I'll send you a piece that I wrote, which basically said institutional racism is about, you know, the policies and practices of an organization which have that impact. And, you know, there is racism in the police force. So the term institutional racism was kind of, you know, popularized by me at Runnymede. You know, people still think, oh, he was that person who said that. So the thing really is you kind of look at that and you look at Scarman, you look at Macpherson, you look at, you know, what's happened in terms of, you know, the recent demonstrations and so on. But each time has its own emphasis. But what I think was different is that people have now really become fed up. I mean, it was very evident to me. People taking the streets and saying, look, you know, we've nothing to lose. This has gone on for too long. I think the frustration came through. But I still wait and see what the response will be. And I think that, you know, the issue with race relations has been, it always comes up on the agenda when there's a crisis.
Absolutely.
Then it kind of recedes. Now, I know the race commission's been set up and, you know, everybody's saying we should be doing something. But one remains to see, you know, see how sustainable that change, you know, will be, whether we will regress. So I suppose it's a kind of a constant fight and different people will continue to fight and so on. But I didn't expect to see this level of regression in all the areas that I've been involved in.
Yeah, absolutely. It's I know that there's a lot that we can talk about, but I'm deliberately staying away. I know the audience will be expecting it, but we're not going to look at India. I think that's a very different perspective there.
Yeah.
I think it's nice that we just focus on the United Kingdom because that is the place that we are right now, especially for yourself. You're part of the community as a global Indian, but definitely human-based. But I think here in those discussions, to wrap it up, Usha, what would be your biggest learnings in the last, you know, 6 decades or so, or 5 decades or so of serving the British public that you think this is, if I were to sum it all up, this is what it is. This is my perspective of life.
My perspective on life is that you never give up. You must persevere. Keep your perspective. Try and understand all different points of view without getting sucked into one or the other, without losing your values and your anchor. Because I think, to me, a value-based life is very important. Because if you really lead a value-based life, you have an anchor and you very rarely go wrong. And I think that's what I would say, you know, perseverance, keep your perspective, and always do whatever you're doing for the right reasons. Because if you want to succeed, do things for the right reasons. Because if you don't, you will not succeed. So those are the kind of things I would say to you is the thing that have guided me through my life, which is important.
Mm.
And I think the other thing really is that you've got to choose when to be angry, because you can't just have, there's a kind of systematic way of actually showing anger, and there's a way of thinking, what strategies do I need to bring about change? Because to me, it's analyzing the situation, looking at a strategy that you're going to bring about, that particular change. And my space mainly has been, what I call organizational change, and that's really what has focused my mind, because every time you think, what do I do here, your first port of call is, what are the values, how do they stack up with my values?
It's been 50 years. I'm sure that there must be another jewel of gems in there somewhere.
Well, the thing is, I'll have to think about this, because if you'd warned me about this question before, you kind of get on with life. You kind of get on with life, and you often don't stop and think about what do I mean, and I think I've given you the fundamentals of it, and if I think of any, I will certainly come back to you. but let me put the question to you. I mean, having you've obviously read my CV, you talked to me, right? What lesson would you draw?
Oh, I wish I was a politician. I'd be as smart to be able to reverse.
I'm not a politician. I'm not a politician.
I think it's a fair question. I think what draws me to you, we've spoken many a time before as well, is you're much more than what other people's stamp of approval mean. You've always almost followed your own North Star. It's very easy for one to be put into that pigeonhole of saying, well, you are part of the ethnic minority group, you are Asian, and therefore you should be fighting for our rights as Asian people. But I think what you've always done is saying, no, we're much more than that. If we are to make a systematic difference and to change and actually say we are part and parcel of the identity of Britain, well, I'm going to do what's best for Britishness. And as a whole of that, that means everybody's included in my journey. That, for me personally, is incredibly different from many other people who we shall not name names in the way that they see their roles. So I suppose the word to associate towards that is having empathy and understanding, because I think that's what sums you up perfectly, as well as your husband. The fact that you do look at things on a multiple of angles. And yes, there is an element of their progression, but it's always been that heart-centric version of saying, who are we as people? Not as Indians, not as a woman, not as this, not as that, but who are we as human beings in this fragile form in the United Kingdom? And what change are we looking to institute? Like, for example, one thing I think a lot of people know you for is the Iraq inquiry. And the level that you're involved in that is unprecedented for anybody, but you never took the standing point that I'm the first Asian to be part of something like this, because I think that would have taken away the magic of that position. So that's what I'll say to you. And I think that's been one of the biggest inspirations for us. When we set up the Global Indian Series, it was to say, let's delve into who we are in the human form.
Yeah, but I think also, it's not just the Iraq inquiry, because one of the messages I think people should take is, you're right about people not often understanding, because the jobs that I've done have been at the heart of the establishment, because, from National Council, Civil Service Commissioner, judicial appointments, you know what I mean? They've been mainstream. And it's an illustration that you can kind of rise above your kind of communal, or you're thinking about you're a woman, you're a minority. You can do these jobs as a human being. And I think it's very important. That is not to say that I do not recognize the struggles. Of course, I've had struggles, by being a minority, of being a woman, you know what I mean? Of course, there are ways in which you kind of, have to deal with that. But the point really is, our aim really should be to get to that position in terms of humanity. And it's the way you approach it.
What a fantastic episode. What a fantastic conversation. And what a remarkable individual Usha is. I think the one thing that I really take away from this is that power of identity, of understanding who you are, why you're doing things. We see it time and time again, especially in our communities, whether you are listening from Fiji, Malaysia, Guyana, Trinidad, the UK, Canada, Uganda, you name it. The reality is we've always got these quote unquote custodians of our community, people who are doing things in the name of saying we are the first Indian people, the first people of Indian origin that have achieved this. And then somebody like Usha comes along and smashes it to bits and reinstates the common sense that is all too not common nowadays, and saying do things from the human aspect, do things that is right for the entire community in which you belong to, not just to one particular segment. That doesn't go away from saying you don't recognize the challenges, but it goes further to say I recognize the challenges that everybody is equally facing in this fragile form of being a human being. I personally find podcasts, the ones that we're doing, incredibly interesting. I think this one with Usha should be a testimony to many people out there, especially the youth, who look towards politicians and look towards politics as a meaningful area to make change, to reconsider and say, why am I doing this for? As always, on a lighter note, if you'd like to find out more about the Global Indian series, it can't be easier. Reach out to us via YouTube at the Global Indian series. You can just type us in. Make sure you follow, like, and subscribe. It really does help. Do the same thing via Podbean, the official channel that we are using at this moment in time for our podcast. That is globalindian.podbean.com. There you can find the entire repertoire of the conversation so far. And if you're on social media, if you like things like Instagram, couldn't be easier either. Check us out on our personal platform at the Nazrans or at the Global Indian series. There you can reach out, tell us what your thoughts are, things that you'd love us to speak about or look into further, and also share your own story. This platform is a platform for everybody, because together we are making a living encyclopedia of our human experience of people, being people of Indian origin. I can finally get my words out. Hey, until next week, I hope all remains well, stay safe, and I hope you enjoyed this session. It was truly fantastic. Bye for now.